Welcome to Care More, Be Better, a podcast for people like you who care about the social impact of conscious companies and everyday heroes. Hear inspiring stories from those who put people and planet before profit and personal gain. You'll learn how you can make a difference, vote with your dollars, and get involved today. Here's your host, Corinna Bellizzi.
Hello, fellow do-gooders and friends. I'm your host, Corinna Bellizzi. With the rise of extremist groups, neo-Nazis, white nationalists, and other hate groups, it's high time that we look through the lens of history and think about what people in the future will say about the era that we're living in today. Frankly, it may take a lot of work for us to stand up with courage and fight for what's right against the rising tide of fascism here and abroad. As we delve into this topic, I'm joined by the father of my business bestie, Julie Drost Logan. Now, George Drost is a man on a mission to preserve the art, culture, and stories of Moravia, a region in the Czech Republic that is rich in history and deeply steeped in tradition. As the youngest son of John Anton Drost, who was born in Moravia in 1909, George grew up hearing the incredible stories of his father's childhood and his experience during World War II. George has since become an advocate for preserving the memory of his father and the people of Moravia. He co-authored a new book called The Quiet Hero: Bridge to Freedom. This is a gripping, emotional tale that's based on the memoirs of his father, John A. Drost. It's lovingly fictionalized by the talented storyteller Nikki Pascarella. This story-driven format does two things. It keeps us turning the pages, rooting for the hero of the story, and it also keeps us on the edge of our seats. It's available now on Amazon.com. And with that, I'm so thrilled to bring you George Drost. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Corinne. That is a very nice introduction, and I appreciate being on your program.
Well, I have to say, I was in a clubhouse room with you last week. They were reading excerpts from the book, and I said, okay, for one, I have to read this. And for two, I want to interview him. So I'm glad that you could make this time on short order so we can bring this to our audience in a timely capacity. I wanted to start by first learning more about you and hearing how your father's influence and his experience in World War II affected you growing up.
Well, it's a long story. My father died when he was 92 years old. So, you'd think you'd get a lot of time with the history, but everybody's so busy, you don't really try to document all of those things and how they might, impact you in your future life. And now it's really kind of working with this next generation to see if some of these stories will be meaningful. But my dad and my mom and other family members were really instrumental in, trying to really connect things up and make some sort of sense out of this long history of my dad and my mom.
Yeah, I imagine that also just hearing the stories like of just your father working to preserve the culture, the antiquities that might be family heirlooms from rugs to pieces of art, that really impacted you too growing up, I would imagine.
Yeah, it's made me a collector, maybe a hoarder, but certainly the apple doesn't fall far from the tree, at least, in the context of what those interests were. And just the history, being able to have a tactile sense of sharing a history with something that was real to me and became even more real when we redid my dad's memoir.
Yeah. What inspired you to bring it out now and to do so in a semi-fictionalized perspective?
Well, the before the turn of the last century, late in the last century, in the 1990s, I encouraged my dad to try to write a book, write memoirs, to really represent what his life and our family's life was like, beginning from his birth and even before that, with some of the antecedents in our family. And so he cut out to write the book, and we hired an author, a writer, a co-writer, and the book was done before he died in 2002. and then sat dormant. It wasn't until my daughter Julie, who with associations like Corinna and others, to try to tell stories. And she felt that this was a great story. And with writers, stories are best told of things you know. And Julie and I knew our family members, but we didn't know the whole story. But we learned a lot as we went through it, and with Nikki's really excellent professional writing, helped to tell this tale, which is pretty close to consistent and accurate with the memoir. So it is fictionalized, but it's fictionalized in the sense that it makes it a little bit less dry and a little more exciting with some of the mortar that you put between the bricks to make it really pop.
Well, and I think as a fiction piece, then you get to a broader audience who can learn with you as they're reading through its pages. It makes it really digestible. Frankly, I found it to be a page turner, as I shared in the beginning. Really kind of kept you at the edge of the seat, wondering what would happen next, even though you know that ultimately he survived, right? It's still you're on that edge of your seat with a bit of fear, and you just don't know what's going to happen to all of the characters that are expressed throughout. And it's just, I think, a really fun read in that perspective. If you could call a book about World War II fun.
Yeah, it really goes to the buildup, what Nikki did in her way that she developed the book was to start at the early ages and those sort of events that impacted my dad and our family, whether it was just hanging out with kids in the old schoolyard, so to speak, and then the taunting, the mockery, but the good times too that the young people had, and then they're disappointed by interruptions. An angry forest preserve ranger who shoots a dog. And then you have these images that transfer into how government and the Nazis in particular were treating people like dogs and without rule of law and without any sense of compassion, but based on misunderstood ideas of the Nuremberg or Rosenberg race laws and how those were convoluted to pit person against individuals. But the bits that you get from the book are forms of resistance. There wasn't any huge James Bond event in the book, where Dad comes out with his ordnance and fights off 2,000 Nazis and wins the war. These were just these smaller acts of courage and cunning, and basically to upset the rulers and some of the false policies that they were trying to promote. And it's good in that context. And then there's the piece about the nationalists after World War II, where because you have a German last name, you become associated with a Nazi fellow traveler or a collaborator, and how that was upsetting. And then the sort of ultimate act in Europe when the communists took over and uh, turned society on its head again for my folks, and which forced them to flee and leave me behind.
Yeah. And I think stories like that were more common in that period. In my own family, my grandmother also got separated from her family for a while. And you just don't hear about those sorts of things happening as much today, unless you're talking again about truly war torn regions. So we see, for example, people of Syria who've left that area, or now if you're looking at conflicts in other spaces around the globe, from Ukraine to the Gaza Strip to South America somewhere, and the stories are coming up again with families being separated and the damage that that does. And sometimes they're not even able to locate one another again. So they're essentially orphaned or they're just a person alone, which is something that I think is hard for people today living in America to truly understand because enough of these stories, they seem removed from their real lives, right? They're removed from their lives of today. But just a couple of generations ago, they were the reality of people living all throughout Europe. And we forget too soon, I think, how devastating that can be. And then it's like you have this wave that comes up again of, the extremism starts to take root again. So I wonder if there's a particular story from the book that resonates with you and that perhaps we could learn from and integrate into perhaps our own quiet form of heroism today.
And those points you bring up are really important, Karina. They this is history repeating itself. It may be in new wine in old bottles or old wine in new bottles. There's always some sort of similarity, and there's a consistency of history. It doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes a lot. And the dislocations to a certain a more immediate effect has been through the immigration migration policies that we're seeing here in the United States, where people are trying to move more on an economic basis rather than a political basis to find a home in the United States, and that's sort of the story where the United States still continues to be the bastion of freedom, despite all of its flaws that we hear repeatedly day after day and night after night on the news runs that you hear. But in this story, there's just smaller pieces of it. And I think one story that I liked was and that was developed during the time that Nikki and Julie were working on the book, was to develop this. How do you get out of the Czechoslovakia at that time to escape to freedom, and the different plots that were concocted not only to get my dad, my mom, but my brother and myself out. And one of them was to hijack an airplane. And my dad was offered a seat on an airplane to that was going to be hijacked, and it was successfully hijacked by my godfather's son-in-law, Vladimir Nedved, and it was documented, probably the second air hijack in history. But my dad chickened out; he didn't want he didn't want to go, and part of it was he was uncertain, but he didn't want to leave his wife and two kids behind, so he had to make a better plan that didn't have this huge risk factor. And one of the things for sure is he wanted freedom. He wanted to live and bring his family out. So those are stories, and then of course the complications of getting me across the border during the communist times, and what kind of intrigue you have to go through in order to accomplish a mission of reuniting families.
Well, as you have shared with me some amazing pictures from the history of your family, for those that are watching on YouTube, I'm going to bring that screen up and encourage the rest of our audience. Even if you're listening to this, you can go to our blog page later and take a look at these pictures. But I think they can offer a jumping off point for us to talk a little bit more deeply about some of these stories that you have to share. Ah, the office life. You still serve as a lawyer, correct?
I do. I occasionally get a call or two, even despite my efforts to kind of disconnect from the daily tasks of maintaining a law practice.
So, you've included some pictures here from your history, including Louina Drost and your grandfather Theodore Drost, who, were alive and who survived World War One, and then, your family next has to deal with World War Two. What do these pictures mean to you?
Well, they give you sort of a real connect up with. There were people that bore your name or bore your genes that existed well before you entered the scene. And you try to draw from what knowledge we have of these family members and how that impacts the current generation, my generation, and the ones that are now succeeding me. And where you see Theodore and his second wife, Laura, he was married 4 times. He was man about town.
Wow, that's my dad. He's been married 5
Oh,
times.
5 times. Well, Theodore was also pretty clever, sort of a wonk, and he invented a process of crystallization of beets to be a sugar substitute, or be a sugar substitute. And he was an inventor, and maybe the inventive mind did affect some of his lifestyle habits. So, and then there's Anna. This is actually an excellent photo of her, kind of giving her, top to bottom full length. And my grandfather, Otto Drost, and Anna was the Jewess. She was a Jew coming from the Deutsch family, and I was in Moravia in March, and I found out so many things. I was interviewed by an organization called Postbellum, which is an oral history depository, memory of nations, and they were trying to really put together more facts together so that they could make sense out of what happened pre-World War II and post-World War II. So the journalist did provide me with information about the Deutsch family. That was Anna Deutsch Drost. She was a Jewess converted to Christianity, to Lutheranism, before she married Otto. And I had documents that basically confirmed at least 3 of our family members were Holocaust victims, and that maybe 17 more were murdered by the Nazis. And that has now led me to a way to memorialize and remember those antecedents in our family that perished. And there's a Stopplerstein program where you get the stumbling stones. You can put the plaques in the sidewalk once you identify the individual and the location of where they last lived. And so I'm at this point of trying to connect up with the Jewish community in Brno to get 3 of them placed and then to have a little ceremony next year. So these are the things that were brought out through the book, and they impact me. And I went to the Jewish cemetery where I saw the family gravesite, and it was pretty interesting. And one of the ironies and one of the sort of unique things is one of the neighbors was Joseph Pulitzer of the Pulitzer publishing family, the person that created the newspaper chains. But out of these little communities in Moravia, you had these people that fled earlier and accomplished quite a bit in the land of the brave and free.
Wow. Now, in the story that you tell with the quiet hero, you share that Jan is having to confront, in some cases, German officers who are saying things like, "Oh, yeah, I know about your family history," and questioning, whether he was German enough, so to speak, to still be of service. And I wondered if that was a close mirror to what he had written, or if some of that was expounded upon and the fictionalization of the work.
According to the testimony of my father, it was absolutely correct, and probably not as detailed as really I would have wanted. But the Gestapo was very ruthless in what they did, and sometimes they would conjecture facts that they would make up facts to try to intimidate the people that they were interviewing. They had a process. It wasn't totally arbitrary, but they basically stacked the cards against you as they were trying to win approval of the higher ups that they were deporting, and they were disposing of these raggedy taggedy elements in society, this Jewish curse that might be persistent, and get those Jews out of this Aryan culture that we're trying to create.
Now, as I share this particular slide with John, Doris, and Bobby, these are individuals, of course, that are within the pages of the book. So all of the characters, or most of them at least, are based on real life individuals and real life stories. And I just wondered if there was a particular story from the book that you wanted to retell for our audience now.
Well, another point or a poignant piece of it is when my dad went to law school, he didn't follow in the family business because that was going to be his older brother was going to take over the typewriter shop, which was sort of the what I'd call the iPhone store in Brno, where you had portable typewriters. Imagine this. This was the way of social media of typing, and to be able to take them out of your home or out of your office and start typing and communicating in multiple fashion with carbon copies. You probably haven't heard of
I
that.
remember them. I'm old enough to remember them. I had an antique typewriter, much like the one depicted on thequiethero.book.com. On one of your pages, you actually show a typewriter, and perhaps that's also in this slide deck. But it looked a lot like the one I had as a hunt and peck growing up. Those you used to really have to hit those keys pretty darn hard to get the thing to actuate all the way to make an imprint. And at the time, they could practically trace a single typewriter to a single document. And often that was a tactic that would be used to persecute more people. You closely talk about that at one scene where you're essentially telling the story of if they discovered the typewriter and saw how the ink of the O would appear on a document, that he'd be done.
Yeah, the alignment of the keys or the way that the keys were formed when they were produced for the typewriter, they take on an individual characteristic. And this was the analytics of that time, where you have cookies here today, and you've got typewriter samples that are held in one of the police registries, and they could track you down if they found a document that came off of your typewriter, trace it to you. And that's sort of unheard of. I mean, not unheard of, but it's not repeated or often well known as a way to kind of corral those resistors. And the point I was going to make with this, my dad going to law school and not choosing to be a typewriter shop guy, was he went to Maastricht University, graduated in 1932, and one of the things he felt so honored about it was when the first president of the Czechoslovakia, Thomas Garrick Maastricht, was there to be presented and introduced to the student body of the university named after him. He was in the honor guard and met Maastricht. And then fast forward, go a few more years ahead in 39, that university, from being this bastion of freedom and intellectual thought and being a place which was revered by the Moravians, became Gestapo headquarters. And so that, was a 360 or a 180 that turned the idea of what that law school was supposed to be on its head. And these things sort of impacted my dad of why such a good thing could become such a bad thing, at least for him. And these are stories. And then this picture in the right corner, that's got one of the Deutsch ones. That's my maternal grandmother, Jana, and then an uncle, and then two of the Deutsch people, one of whom was perished in the Holocaust. These are those pre-World War II sort of, the world's not going to change. They try to give you sort of a sense of calm and normalcy, and they don't. They get ripped apart.
Yeah, the quiet before the storm. I mean, even just looking at this little dog on the motorcycle, it's adorable. And they were so in love too. You tell the story of Jan meeting your mom and falling in love instantly, and their time together in that honeymoon phase within the pages of the book too.
Yes,
Yeah.
and that the grandma Matela, Jana, and this is one of the things I found out in March. She spent 3 years in jail because she was complicit in my departure, being smuggled out of the Czech lands, and then
So this is Doris's mother you're speaking of?
yes, his mother, and then that's Uncle Stanyu, who was the guy that ratted on my my dad. He was the one that pointed out to the post World War II government that maybe my brother-in-law is a collaborator, and that caused quite a bit of angst. But you see the dichotomy here, the difference, of one trying to get me free and the other one trying to maybe do something.
Coddle favor. I mean, it was a really difficult time for people, and individuals responded differently. Where your father was working to preserve heritage and culture and try to protect the assets of people who were literally stripped of all of their belongings. Doris's mother, his wife's mother, was of that same ilk, and then her brother Stana, you know, maybe looking out for himself a little bit, which was also common. This is part of what tore families apart.
That is very true, and there's one of the characteristics that sometimes is applied to Czechs is that there's some jealousy, and Stanya was maybe not the favorite brother-in-law of my dad, and there could have been some envy, some jealousy, but we will do some further research, and this is the Harry Lime movie of the third man kind of setting of these this couple walking across the Charles Bridge in Prague, and it almost looks like they're trying to run away from something. So we like that photo.
Walking briskly for certain.
6 months after they were married. And these are just examples of how I was quickly Americanized, wearing a cowboy suit that we had to have one. And then an early Christmas, it was our second Christmas in the United States. So we're starting to assimilate. And my dad, my mom, my brother, and little George under the armpit of my dad. Well, it gives you a little flavor for people, and that they're real people, and have aspirations that are not uncommon. And to your point, Corinna, people aren't that different. They want to protect their interests, protect their families, and then protect those institutions that act as an umbrella over those basic needs and instincts that people have. Don't kill me.
We got a taste of this during COVID. People become more insular when there is a threat from the outside. Suddenly, people are hoarding toilet paper and going and buying just all the flour and sugar from the shelves at the grocery store because we don't tend to think as far beyond our own households when there is, tragedy coming at us and uncertainty from all ends. That's when fear starts to drive behavior more. So, if we can, I think, look at these things eyes wide open and think about the impact and the greater impact, I think fiction and true stories, even told through fiction, help us to do that, help us to remain honest with ourselves and think about what could be next and try to just retain that sense of community a little longer, a little stronger and build togetherness as opposed to kind of the separation. My father has often said that his reason for not being religious, because he's non-religious spiritual, right, is that he believes that organized religion is very good at creating systems of control. And I think that that can be true at a certain point when you're talking about, you know, let's say the people who you would define as being very Catholic, as opposed to the people that, go to church here and there. But I kind of wonder in a way if it's something that has just become too entrenched in culture to think first here in the United States of the individual and not of the whole, because we are driven towards this kind of individualistic success, individualistic perspective, and as part of the American dream in a way, but that also I think kind of separates us from one another a bit. I wonder what your thoughts are about that.
Yeah, and to your dad, we need rules, and there's rule of law, which is important. And you don't have to love religion or like it, but religion can be very positive uh, with rules and understanding and the theology. in government, you want to be an individual, but you need to have certain constructs that people can't, form their own armies to protect themselves. They can't, mint their own coins. They can't go build their own interstates. They need to have some cooperative efforts that, work for the common good and the preservation of that freedom that they have. And in life, nothing's absolute, not absolute 100% freedom. You're provided with liberty, but it's not libertine where you just do what you want to do with no rule. Where I think there was a presidential candidate said, if I walk down Fifth Avenue in New York, I can take my gun out and shoot anybody, and no one would do anything. But that is not a a good way to run a society.
No, and I think we probably know who that was, but
We
yes.
do. Yeah, we do. Or in some form, that presidential candidate said that. But you do need to have constructs. You need to have some guardrails. You need to have some boundaries. Otherwise, it doesn't work. Whether you take religion or not, or if you're an agnostic or an atheist, you have to have some rules to survive. Where do you get your orange juice from? Where do you get cat litter? There has to be some sort of organized system to be able to distribute and produce goods and services and not just decide, well, I don't want to work today. I don't want to distribute the milk today. I don't want to go in and operate on Corinna's foot today. You need to have expectations and rules and basically to be able to create a society that hopefully will be a fair and just society.
Yeah. Well, I mean, some people don't wanna pay taxes, and yet they forget that the bridge that they just drove over, um, has a cost to it, and ensuring that the roads on your block aren't full of potholes has a cost to it, and education for the young children, that has a cost to it, and so these things are community-based, and they tend to be funded with some of our taxes, and that part of that is organization, and part of that is government. So, if we strip it back to the bare minimum, then we start to leave a lot of people behind, and then you get other societal issues that erupt from that as well, like increases in crime and things along those lines. So,
Yes, those unintended consequences, what really looks like a good deal, and a good deal for me, may backfire and have that boomerang effect where, maybe that wasn't such a good idea. So, and you want to think about stuff, but not necessarily overthink stuff. But to your earlier point, where history repeats itself, there's certain lessons that we learn from history. There's things that you should be doing and certain things you shouldn't be doing. We're going through that with where does free speech end to where it becomes hate speech or where it becomes incendiary, where it develops antagonisms that go to reach to violence. So there's that balance that society needs, and there has to be some rules. And we're imperfect, but the idea is you try to do the best job you can with a sense of kindness and a sense of moral. If you don't or religious or ethical or whatever. But there's some, again, constructs that do support a society that can benefit the great majority of people.
yeah, that's right. Now, I wondered if there was a favorite story that you tell within the book that you wanted to share.
Yeah, the favorite story is about Flock, the dog. How the dog was a resistor. Peed on grapes and just had a lot of fun with the kids and stole the food from the butcher. These were sort of these allegories that how people survived. But then the outcome when the forest ranger basically made up his own rules to shoot the dog, and that was favored in the sense that it really heightened the sensitivity in me about how people could be cruel to one another. Again, using the dog as an example of not really doing anything bad, but just had the irrational hatred of this individual that either didn't like the dog or didn't like the owners of the dog and did something, mean. It's a story that I connected with.
Well, I think we all love the stories of the dog. Where the Red Fern Grows and Old Yeller will remain two of my favorite books forever.
Lassie was a hero, and she didn't have a driver's license either. So
Yeah. I see some pretty fun depictions on postcards and things like that of dogs driving, but there's always a human behind that pedal. Now, as we prepare to wrap, I'd like to take a little bit of a how to lens. What lessons do you think that your father left you with that you think are most applicable today?
that's a good question, and I think you go with the word perseverance. And I don't like to think of myself as some righteous person, but a fair person and a humane person. And don't give up on society. Don't give up on yourself. Um, and in the wake of oppression and in the sort of storm of war and hardship, you can still level yourself and not lose your dignity and still try to keep the hope alive. You've heard that term a lot. Keep the faith alive. Keep something that is part of the human spirit that doesn't extinguish, and that there's, to borrow, the famous phrase from Annie. You bet your bottom dollar, on tomorrow, and you just don't give up.
Yeah, I think it's that stick to itiveness, right? When you have a big challenge, then you have to really keep at it. And I think in today's world, we're confronted with some really big challenges. Like you hear things about the climate getting too warm and what that's going to mean for the global south. And then you have a big migration of people coming north. How do we tackle that challenge? How do we tackle the challenge of sharing technology and ensuring that people have equal access to be able to thrive and grow? And then, how do we tackle food insecurities around the globe? These are all really big issues. We see that there's been a disruption in the breadbasket of Europe with the war in Ukraine. And so food has become more expensive. How do we tackle that? I mean, these are things that become interconnected. And as we become a more global society, they're global concerns, not local concerns any longer. So we really do have to get to a space where we can think globally and then still act locally and still engage in community and still ensure that our interests are served on a local level, but as a part of a whole, as opposed to, sitting at home and staring at our belly buttons all day. At least that's my perspective. And I think the perspective of many people that are looking at the climate challenges that we face today and growing uncertainty in certain spots around the globe as well, just from a political strife issue or war for resources. I mean, this problem has existed as long as humanity has existed, so it's not likely to go away anytime soon. We need to be able to stick to a problem and work to solve it.
Right, education, listening, and believing in issues that are provable by a non-biased approach. Where reality has to dictate us. If the ice caps are melting and your environment is burning up, maybe some causal connection to that scientists have answers to, and you have to take the remediation and the prevention and then the remediation to correct those imbalances.
Yeah, and we also have to trust the specialists to know a thing or two about the things that they spend a lifetime researching. I can't tell you how many times that I've essentially been gaslit in media where I show some proof or make a comment about like what's happening with the weather patterns and people saying, "Well, show me the research and prove it." This, that, or the next thing. It's like, well, the scientific community agrees these things are happening and the proof is all over the place. But if you're not satisfied with that, I'm not gonna change it for you, and unfortunately, I think we've gotten to a position in our society today, especially in America, where people get to this diametrically opposed viewpoint and they aren't listening to each other anymore. So, I personally think we need to spend more time actively listening and engaging with one another and understanding or coming from the place where we already understand before we commence conversing or arguing about these ideas or our ideas that we have more in common than we don't. And so if we can start there and find commonality, then we can get to the root of the problem and perhaps the concerns and the fears that underlie those problems and then work to solve them together. And that's just to me the key solution that we need to work towards is this kind of collaborative framework or collaboration and even our learnings. And frankly, I think fiction can help us get there too, because if you can entertain someone for a little bit and teach them something at the same time, then you're getting somewhere.
Indeed, and your points are so well taken with finding the things that unite us rather than divide us, and that really it's not a perfect world, but basically I think 80%, you can throw out your number, but the great majority of people don't want to do harm. They want the world a better place, and it's coming to some sort of compromises and just working things out without becoming an authoritarian dictatorship where history will show undermines really the principles that are so attractive to individuals in their quest for individualism and freedom.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for joining me today, George. I wonder if you have any closing thoughts that you'd like to share before I wrap and share everywhere that people can find out more about this book and your work.
No, buy the book because it's going to help support Julie's kids getting through college. Seriously, it's no, we'd like you to read the book, but I think we're okay that way. But it's a treat to be able to share these thoughts and these ideas with you, Corinna. And I would just say keep the faith, whatever faith there is. I don't want to work on your dad too badly, but there are ways to persevere and be a critical thinker and try to be a partner in society to make it a better place.
That's a beautiful closing thought. Thank you, George. To find out more about George Drost, visit the links that we provide in show notes. You'll find a direct link to purchase The Quiet Hero on Amazon and a link to our expanded blog page on caremorebebetter.com. For those of you who've been listening only, you can go to that page and look at all of the beautiful pictures that George has provided of his family during and before World War II. As a reminder, we're prepping to launch our new Cause Before Commerce site, circleb.co. This site will host the same content that you find today on caremorebebetter.com, while also providing a helpful resource and tools to help you live a greener and more socially and locally engaged life. You'll find how-to guides and DIY tools that can help you renew what you have, replace things that you buy, and even reduce your waste. When it fully launches this summer, circleb.co will offer products from plastic-free housewares and clothing to health-promoting supplements and personal care items, all of which are circular in design, that minimize waste, and that seek to limit or eliminate plastic use. You can explore our landing page now to learn more about this upcoming launch at circleb.co. Thank you, listeners and watchers, now and always, for being a part of this pod and this community, because together we really can do so much more. We can care more, we can be better, we can ditch fascism, preserve community, and build the culture-rich future that we want. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Care More, Be Better, a podcast for social good. To make sure you never miss an episode, subscribe, rate, and review wherever you listen to podcasts, and share with your friends to help us reach more people and spread more social good.